All right, Theseus Body and Mind Legion. Hope we're doing awesome this week. We've got an amazing live discussion lined up today. Can't even remember the exact title, but it's something along the lines of peak physical training, even on a packed out schedule. Got my awesome brother and co-host Gaz with me this week, which is always a bonus. How are we doing, Gaz?
Yeah, all is fine and well. Warm weather.
Oh, awesome. Glad to hear it. How warm is it over there on your side of the pond?
I reckon it's going to be in the 30s by the afternoon. It's still only 11:15, so it's starting to get hot.
Perfect. Awesome stuff. And are you still managing to get training in?
Every day,
around
sometimes
that?
Twice a day.
Yeah,
as long as it's
awesome.
called running.
As long as it's called running, yeah. I mean, that's actually one of the reasons I want to talk about this today, because we've obviously been catching up like we do, and I know that you've been doing a lot of running that you want to be doing anyway, but rehabbing your knee, but that you've managed to fit it very much around the 1-year-old child, the Emrys, which I think is really awesome. And I think that's something that other people are going to find really interesting to hear, kind of how you're managing to get your own training in around that, and the kind of little nuances that go hand in hand with always running with a stroller,
Yeah.
sometimes off-road.
Yeah, I haven't ran without a stroller in months. I'm really curious to see what my times are without it.
I'm curious to know if you'll pick up one of these kind of weird trademark sort of like form discrepancies. You know, like who was that guy? Was it? I'm going to totally butcher the name now. Is it Hotech? The guy who used to run to school carrying his books under one arm. And he became like one of the most successful marathoners of all time. But always ran this really weird kind of crook over to one side.
Yeah.
He'd always run carrying his books under one arm.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I'm
because
hoping you've got one.
I've often seen, and you can spot it with some degree of accuracy, what we call the squatty run. I don't know if you've seen the squatty run where the elbows are up slightly to avoid the belt kit, the pouches on the belt. You see guys running along like this. Often accompanied by lady wrists.
Yeah, definitely if they're members of the army.
Yeah.
Makes even more sense. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, have you done anything sort of consciously to avoid that, out of curiosity?
I do. I try and maintain posture. I try and touch the stroller as little as possible. So I just kind of have my fingers on it and push here and there. And then I always run to a rhythm because, not to get too far away from your question, but I have a cadence, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And what I'll do is I'll basically do 8 on one side, swap the arm, 8 on the other. 8 on one side, swap the arm, the pushing arm, 8 on the other. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right. Just to kind of keep everything even. So I'm not used to just running along, pushing it with the left hand and so on and so forth. The only time that comes into action is going downhill, but I've got a little strap that goes around the wrist that's attached to the stroller. So I sort of let it roll and chase it as best as possible. But obviously the left arm, because the strap's on the left, always ends up leading. But yeah, I wanted that too. The other thing I do, luckily, the one I've got is called the Bob. There's an adjustable handle. And so I put that handle essentially as low as possible. Because I did find when it was higher, I was running a bit like this. Because I was just picking my arms up to have my hands on there. But when it's low, the shoulders can come down. I can do this and just touch it to keep it going. But it depends. It depends on one, if I'm going uphill or downhill, and on the flats, is it a flat where I want to open up and run a bit faster. How fatigued am I feeling? I've noticed I kind of touch it more when I'm feeling fatigued, because it does take a little bit of extra energy to just sort of push it away from you, push it away from you, push it away from you. And of course, you've got to steer the bloody thing as well. Also,
Yeah.
so yeah, those are all factors. But yes, in short, I am conscious of how it's affecting running style. And I think for a lot of people, I've put a lot of effort into what would be considered more the pose method of running, which relies on pull and not taking too big of strides. So I think for a lot of people, running with the stroller will probably actually help them improve their gait, because one of the biggest issues with recreational runners tends to be overstriding. Anyway, so it keeps keeps you going like a little. Do you remember the Smurfs? So it keeps you, kind of moving like that, as opposed to
that's right.
overstriding. Because obviously, if you overstride, you're gonna kick the thing. You're gonna kick a wheel, or you're gonna kick the base of the stroller. So I think there's some pros to actually running with pushing the stroller.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Leading on from that, different question, but in terms of running strength, there's two things I've been doing with it. If you can't find a really steep hill and you want to do hill sprints, that little bit of resistance, it can feel on the flats, sometimes when you get a bit of momentum going, not that much different to running normally. You're just pushing it, and adjusting the direction of the stroller. But when you go uphill, obviously you've got gravity. Now you really do have the weight of it acting against you. So if you're going to do hill sprints, it is more resistance, which for what I'm trying to achieve with my hill sprints at the moment is purely, it's not anaerobic conditioning. When I do the hill sprints, I'm rehabbing an injury. It's purely for muscular strength. So adding that little extra resistance to a hill that isn't ideally steep enough for what I want to achieve actually helps with my goals, because that extra resistance is a little bit more to push into when I'm trying to power up the hill.
So how much is Emrys weighing now, roughly?
I'm in the States, so he gets weighed in pounds. So he's 22.2 pounds.
So he's about
it's
10.5 Ks or whatever.
Exactly.
10 yeah. So that in itself, that's not a bad weight to be adding kind of onto a hill. I mean, that's a heavy weighted vest. Plus, you've got the buggy, which I imagine is at least half that weight again.
That's true. Yeah. And one thing that does make a difference, because you can recline him and put him forwards, the baby, actually the balance of the buggy affects the resistance. So when he's right in the center of it, when he's sat up, I almost feel like it's more resistance than when he comes back a bit and his weight's more over the back wheel, and then I find it a bit easier. But that's just more nuances. And then the other thing I'm doing for rehab that helps is when I hit hills, if I'm just doing a training run, it's not a timed run, I'm going backwards up the hills anyway, because I'm trying to do the sort of how can I put it, the positive portion of deceleration, because that's often where you have impact on your joints. So if you imagine if you're running or you're jumping or something and you decelerate, you go like this, you're putting resistance to going forwards, but you do what's known as the negative portion, the eccentric contraction. And so I'm working on the concentric traction part of that to build as much strength around the joint so I can decelerate effectively. So I'm actually doing a lot of backward running up hills.
I was going to say, you could pull him up some hills, couldn't you? If you
exactly.
Really wanted to.
That's exactly what I do. Is that most of the time, just on my regular sort of maintenance runs, I turn around and I run backwards and I pull him up the hill. So it's almost like doing a sled drag.
Yes, I think we were talking about this actually in one of our calls, weren't we? But yeah, that makes perfect sense, and that's really interesting. And I always find it funny when we have our conversations, we always end up going into nuances about this sort of stuff, and I'm not sure if anyone else ever
Yeah.
thinks about it or cares.
Yeah, that's true.
It's quite funny.
That's true. But I think
Overthinking every aspect.
for the general point, though, I mean, you can fit all kinds of training into your life. So when you think about it, when I do that, I walk the baby, I get him to sleep. That's how he goes to sleep. I do a maintenance run on those days, and I rehab my knee by going backwards up the hills. You know, so I'm actually getting, you know, a few things in under one umbrella.
I mean, to be honest, this is one of the things that I want to talk about. You know, it's one thing that I end up talking about with clients quite often, which is the opportunities that are outside of the box to obtain some kind of positive physical adaptation. You know, outside of necessarily specific exercise periods, or you know, alongside them. You know. Because this is quite often the difference between people who achieve a high level of fitness and people who don't. You know, you're always thinking about how you can optimize what you're doing to achieve that end result. You know, I mean, I do it all the time. I've talked about with clients non-negotiable habits, but just it can be as simple as cut down workouts that you decide you're just going to do throughout the day. Like if one thing you're really working on at the moment is just your pull-up strength, you know, we've talked a lot before about things like greasing the groove. You know, there's nothing to stop you if you don't even have time for a workout every single day. If you've got a pull-up bar in a doorway in your home somewhere, you know, you're walking in and out of that doorway however many times a day. There's nothing to stop you doing 2 to 3 pull-ups every time you walk through. And thinking about the nuances of it, you know, are you varying the way you're doing it? Like where are your sticking points in that lift necessarily? Is it worth varying the positions of your hand placement every time you do that lift, or even, you know, like again, just nuances, but maybe doing some sets with a mixed grip to try and sort of figure out where your weak points are and stuff like that. So, you know, I talk a lot about NEAT activity, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, increasing calorie expenditure through doing more exercise or doing more activity that is not exercise. It can be as easy as simple as driving and parking further away from the shops when you go there. You know, if people tend to be on laptops all day or computers all day, I'll get them standing, I'll get them modifying the desk so they can be standing, or get them just walking around, pacing around when you're on calls, and all these kind of things. So, you know, the point is that for everyone who's busy and has a very busy schedule, but who is highly motivated to improve their fitness, there are lots of hidden opportunities within each day you could be maximizing for that benefit. And this is why I brought up you with the stroller, because that's a perfect one. You're out with the boy anyway, you know, so why not make it a workout? And I mean, so talk us through your kind of you know, what does your kind of program look like with that at the moment? Because that pretty much is all your training, isn't it?
In many ways, yeah. I've created my own monster, because sometimes the sports scientist in me, the programmer, wants to say not run and dedicate that day session, whatever, purely to strength development. And the monster I've created is the baby's got so used to being ran to get to sleep. Some days it's the only thing that will work. So whether I planned it or not, I'll end up running twice a day. And that could go like 4 or 5 days in a row. You know, walking just doesn't cut it. He'll bawl his head off. So in that way, I've given myself not much of a choice. Other than that, there are other things. You know, I'm going to end up walking him twice a day. So the first one's going to be my longer run, or depending on where I am. If I wanted to do a strength session, the next one will be I'll walk him around, get him to sleep while he's asleep. You know, I'm then going to put in my kettlebells and my pull-ups and whatever. What I've found is that sometimes I've had to compromise. And ideally, I'd like to dedicate each session to an individual purpose. But I can't get the baby to sleep without running on a particular day. So I basically run him till he sleeps, cut my run short as soon as he's asleep, come back, do my pull-ups, without exerting myself on that run. So I feel like I'm not going to hinder my strength gains by turning that session into an endurance session. Yes, it's become a mixed session that would resemble something of a more sort of circuit training type session. But guess what? It's better than missing the strength session entirely. Other times it doesn't work out, and I've had to sacrifice that strength session. It wasn't in line necessarily with my plans and my goals, but you know what? The plans of mice and men, that happens. I was still active. It was better than sitting on my bum, not training. I think in terms of running intensity, when you bring the intensity right down, you're still being active. You're still going to tell your body that you move. That's what you do. And I think you can still avoid what some might consider overtraining, where that there will be a negative impact of that run on your fitness goals. So if you're, if you're stressing your system constantly, and you already did it that day, do you know what? If you run for just, if you're an averagely fit, recreationally fit person, if you run for a couple of miles behind the pain, behind the difficult pace, it's not much different than having to go for a long walk. It's going to be negligible. But it is going to benefit you in that human beings are designed to move. So you're probably going to, digest better and all the other things as a result. So in that side of things, I try to never get negative about it, because how can you be negative about the fact that you did a training session? It's positive. So that's the biggest thing that we always talk about is consistency. And if you let these little nags and negative thoughts nag you, then you're going to say, oh, what's the point in training today? And you're not going to do it at all. And I've been guilty of it as well. Like some days I've come back from that second run, I'm going like, oh, that negates my strength training session, and I've not done it. And then starting a couple of weeks ago, I was like, just do it anyway. It's not optimal, but it's better than zero. and this is life, boo-hoo, poor you.
And I think that's something I talk about a lot as well. Is there's a big difference between optimal on paper and true optimal. True optimal is actually the best you can do under the circumstances and still remain as close to peak state as you can while you're doing it. So actually, so for using that as an example, optimal under the conditions where you're not able to execute the training that you planned to, or it didn't go exactly how you wanted it to, but staying positive about it and having a constructive mindset, that is optimal, because that's more optimal than, causing yourself all sorts of hardship in order to try and execute a session that's not practical, and then not enjoying it, or, creating stress somewhere else because you missed an appointment or whatever it might be. That's much less optimal. So optimal exists only really in theory. Perfect is only ever really in theory. The true perfect, the true optimal is
in vivo,
can actually get done. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say something else, and and also you're always going to get much better results. Your approach is 100% the best way to go. Maintaining that positive outlook. I've been reading a lot of stuff, particularly recently, about data on people that are performing better when they're happy, or when they're happier, or when they're more engaged in what they're doing, and all of the kind of tangible sort of science-backed effects of this kind of positive psychology stuff. And the truth is that no matter which way you look at it, we do feel what we think. That's why we practice visualizations. That's why we practice, positive associations. All of this stuff, all of this kind of what many sort of deem to be more hippie type stuff and the positive psychology stuff like affirmations and all of that stuff. It basically boils down to the same thing, which is feeling what you think.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
sort of going back to what you were saying, sort of guys like us, we can, how can I put it? When we want to achieve a fitness goal, it can be a bit easier because we're into it. You were talking about, say, they wanted to achieve the pull-up, or they wanted to do this or that, or whatever your fitness goal is, and you talk about fitting it into time. You will do whatever your mind is on. So whatever you're into and whatever you're interested in is where you're going to go. So very easy to say, harder to execute on, and it's a broad sweeping thing to say. But for individuals that are struggling with that, you've got to get into it. Yeah. How you do that, well, that's so unique to each individual. You'd have to know the case study and help them with that, and you'd have to be, I don't know, Carl Jung or something to break the person down and find out exactly who they are and what motivates them. But the simple truth is, if something is on your mind constantly because you're into it, you're excited by it, or you're interested in it, then you will achieve it. And you've got to become interested to the point where you are interested in the nuances and the details, and you do get to know yourself. And I think how that is done in fitness is, maybe you do have to go through that period where you have a program, someone sets a program for you. It might be a different length of time for each individual, but get into it for what it is and understand it. And then you'll start understanding yourself and your own body and your own idiosyncrasies. And then you'll be able to sort of think for yourself on it. Very broad thing to say, and I know there's not very many instances there. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you, as you start to train, you realize that your pushing strength isn't particularly brilliant, and you're doing things like press ups and bench press, and it's not your chest where you feel weak. Maybe it's in your arms. Okay, well, maybe you individually have problems firing your triceps effectively, or maybe you just got really long arms, you feel it there rather than in your chest. That's an example of being on a program. Okay, it wasn't optimal, it was a generalized program just for people, but you now know that to improve your pushing strength, you probably need to work your triceps more. But that comes from getting into it and being interested in it. A person that's not interested and is not interested in it says, I've been doing all these push-ups and bench press, but my pushing strength isn't going. Oh, I don't know why. I'll just do more. I'll get someone to give me something where I just do more bench press and more push-ups and so on and so forth, rather than, breaking down what the individual issue is. And it's the same thing when it comes to optimizing your goals around a busy life. If you're interested in what you're doing, you will find a way. Today I didn't get to go out. I don't know. I don't have room in my little flat to do push-ups. I just can't stretch out anywhere. I mean, highly unlikely. So I do them outside, and it was raining. But maybe you did have room to, if you've got a rubber band, to put it behind your heel and do some tricep extensions, because that's where your weak point was. And no, it wasn't ideally what you wanted to do, but you still did something towards your goals. And these are the little things that people that are interested in what they do and prioritize it will do. So the long and short of it is, get into your own head, get into your own mind, and find a way to make this stuff appealing and interesting to you. Because if you're not that interested and you're expecting someone else to feed it to you, it's not a recipe for consistency. You've got to, even if you don't necessarily 100% like it, like you're never going to be one of those guys that just loves it, loves doing about it. It's like studying at school. You had to get into the subject to pass on some level. It's like filling out a Excel spreadsheet for something at work. Okay, it might not be the side of work that you're massively interested in, but do you know what? You logically saw where it fit into the grand scheme of things, and you learned about it and got into it and did it for the sake of doing it with some degree of, interest in nuance, because if you didn't, it just wouldn't get done. I mean, in that case, you just wouldn't get paid and you get fired. But you've got to find a way to make things have those consequences. Not necessarily negative, but just to have that importance in your mind. Just to reasonably say, if I don't get into this, it won't happen. And so which are the parts I find fun and which are the parts I find interesting? And you know what? The other parts will start to slowly come in. But you cannot look at this fitness goal as something you do in your spare time. It's not something for spare time. It's something you fit into your day, and it's a priority, just as important as brushing your teeth, and just as important as getting to work on time, and just as important as making sure you buy all your shopping. It's just as important. Just think of how much of a screw up you'd feel if you didn't do one of those things. Well, there's basically, if you didn't train in some way, shape, or form, that's essentially how I feel. It's like, I'm disorganized. I didn't manage my life properly today. That was something that I should have done. And I know the way I'm talking, it makes it sound a little negative, but it needn't be. The same way that getting up in the morning needn't be negative. It's just a part of your day, and from there on you can make it productive and enjoyable. That's that for me is the biggest thing, is get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to give everything some meaning to you, otherwise it's irrelevant. And we've talked about this loads before, about how everything's just really a matter of perspective, and that's really, when you talk about mindset conditioning, you're really just talking about how to master your own perspective on things, and understanding that your thoughts are the filter through which what's happening around you becomes something that you feel like, really, that becomes negative or becomes positive. nothing is inherently any of those things. It's only your own filtering process that determines that. It's a funny thing, like I was talking to our friend Peter Nupfer, who's transformational life coach, and his partner Catherine, he's also a duty legend, I'll add. His partner Catherine, she's ended up specialising very much in career coaching. Both amazing coaches, and I was chatting to Peter about this, and he was saying how it's a bit of a dangerous game sometimes when you're coaching people for kind of big changes, like particularly with career changes. The more they focus their energy on looking for another job, the more negative connotations they tend to attach to the job that they have. So you're always trying to find this balance between, adding meaning to the job that they already have, because actually that's the easiest way to find that instantaneous happiness. And the easiest way to make yourself depressed is to hinge your happiness on an outcome that hasn't happened yet. Well, not to get depressed, but the easiest way to kind of lessen your happiness or what I'm saying. You're hinging it on an outcome. You're now waiting for something else to happen before you can be happy.
That's a good point. I'm going to take that one on.
Yeah. But this is the thing, and as sort of amateur athletes, professional athletes, high achievers, you're always hinging, you're always looking for outcomes, you're always thinking ahead, and we quite often get lost in the process and forget to enjoy the process, which is really the whole point. You hear it all the time. It's a very cliche thing, isn't it? Like, enjoy it. If you don't enjoy the ride, like, what's the point of the journey? But it's absolutely bang on. And if you listen to sort of career coaches and people sort of talk about how to add instant happiness to your life, they always talk first about adding meaning to what you're already doing before you think about your aspirations for the future, or they should do. It's a funny thing. So, anyway, I just want to bring it back a little bit to the kind of main theme, really, because all that stuff's super important, and anyone who's got goals, got aspirations, specifically towards kind of specific like fitness challenges and things, definitely it's worth asking the question, you know, how meaningful that goal is to you, and how, you know, where you can enjoy the process. But more importantly, so how can people look at, you know, for example, busy career-driven people tend to be the people that I deal with as clients, and they're essentially usually looking at ways that we can juggle all of those commitments into one. Like guys that come on, they want to get back in shape, they've either been in shape before or they never have been, they're now very busy at work, you know, executive professionals or whatever, got a family, but want to achieve that peak fitness and want to get just above kind of average. Yeah, and again, you know, when I talk about sort of Ironman training that I was doing last year and the training that I've been doing leading up to this 100K, the big assumption that I quite often find people have when they talk about that with me is they just wouldn't have time to do it. But I would argue that almost everybody can find a way of optimizing their schedule to achieve a much higher level of fitness for those kind of events than they might think is possible. Yeah, I was a bit waffly, but basically there are ways of optimizing a training program, even if you are pushed for time, that mean you could still be training for ultra marathons, you know, Ironmans, endurance events, or even shorter events, but getting really good times, you know, half Ironmans or marathons, and looking at unlocking that sort of peak fitness. So yeah, my kind of standout one really is just to kind of get the ball rolling, is valuing the gaps that you do have in your schedule already. Because often people will look at their schedule and say, you know, I've only got 30 minutes, you know, free sort of 3 days a week. Like I can't do anything with that. I want to train for a marathon. Like what can I do with that time? And there's actually loads that can be done with that time that's conducive to good results. And there's a lot that you can do in that time that also isn't optimal. And one thing I sort of wanted to touch on is, you know, that HIIT training, short, high-intensity interval training sessions, has become very popular in recent years. It has massive benefits. It's definitely it definitely serves a purpose for people who are busy and are particularly on a weight loss, you know, journey, or you know, just looking for all-round kind of general fitness. But equally, it's not necessarily the answer for people that are training for specific sports or endurance events. It's quite easy to overtrain on. And I would say that 30 minutes of even light aerobic training plays massive benefit into any kind of endurance event that you're hoping to do in the future, whether it's a marathon, whether it's a half marathon, whether it's an ultra marathon, you know, really. So that's my kind of key point to start with, really, is valuing those short periods and not discounting them as being insufficient to get a positive adaptation out of. So yeah, have you got anything off the top of your head that you want to add on that before I go into specifics?
Yeah, I think number one, there's two things I think I've said before. You know, to echo the name of Pavel Tsatsoulin's company, strength first. So what does strength first mean? Well, basically it means when your body is physically strong, you are prehabilitated against injury that may occur in your endurance training. But cardio is king. Am I still with you?
Yeah.
Because my phone okay, yeah. I think my phone's overheating. Funny things are happening to it. So, yeah, strength first, cardio is king. When you have a good endurance base, you're basically primed to in my mind,
your phone is,
all of your have a good, endurance base. Is it back?
Yeah, the video went, then the sound went, and then you came back. Actually, that's
okay, good. Yeah, it's warm out.
Now,
Might be overheating.
Mm.
So where was I? So if you have a good endurance base, I think your sessions will be so much better because you have the capacity for work within that session and the ability to recover. These days, I'm gone back to being more of a fan of separating your sessions for your training goals. So if you're going to have a session towards strength, you're going to train strength. If your goal is endurance, you're going to train endurance. And then the time when I mix the two is where, after a period of several weeks or months of training those separately, you want to consolidate those goals, those gains. And that only takes a few weeks to adapt like that. The time for mixed training is at the beginning if you're completely untrained, and then towards the end of a training cycle where you want to, again, consolidate your strength and endurance gains. So that first period, I wouldn't do HIIT. It would be just general circuits for a period of general adaptation. You can get that in a 30-minute session. After that, you're separating your days, and you're dedicating, say, one session to endurance, give it a day of rest, the next session to strength, so on and so forth. And when you reach a point where you start basically plateauing on some of those things, that's when your high intensity training sessions come in. So you then convert some of your endurance gains in that pure systemic way, which basically what people call cardio, like how strong your heart and lungs are, and develop a little more muscular endurance. But guess what? Your muscular endurance appears better when you are stronger, because the higher your 1 rep max, the greater, if I can deadlift, let's call it 300 kilos, then I can deadlift 100 kilos way more times than if I can only deadlift 200 kilos. So your reps and your absolute strength are interlinked with when it comes to lifting a lighter weight. You can become better at it without lifting that lighter weight more times without necessarily your max strength going up, with a bit more local muscular endurance, but that's a very quick adaptation. And that's where the HIIT training comes in. So you basically create lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of waste products in your body, which your body then learns to buffer. And that process of learning to buffer those waste products, that lactic acid and it's actually the detached hydrogen ions from the lactic acid process, and breathe out all that carbon dioxide in a much more efficient way. Where I'd fit that into a training cycle is, again, I would wait to a point where you start to plateau on your strength and endurance gains in your individual sessions, and use that HIIT training to then say starting times, you just bring up your mean speed, your mean average speed throughout that. How does that fit into a 30 session? Again, you can do total body strength training in 30 minutes, and you can do a good 20 to 25 minute steady state run and still have time to shower in 30 minutes. I mean, and it leaves you wanting more. So in many ways, that's a good window for training, because people will always come off feeling like they've got a little bit more in the bag, which, guess what, tomorrow's another day. You're going to put more effort in. I don't know how true it was when he said this, but Schwarzenegger said when he was training at his best, at his peak, he would actually cut his sessions in the gym. I mean, bear in mind, he was doing 2 to 3 sessions a day, this sort of split routine. But he would cut down his individual sessions, his time in the gym, to 40 minutes. And that would always leave him wanting more. It would make him come back. So yes, I be coaching their goals are, it's bodybuilding, but still the principle is the same. He's still an elite high achiever, an elite athlete in a sport of bodybuilding, whose muscles were bigger and more cut and more shapely than everybody else's at the time. And he was limiting his sessions to 40 minutes. That's an elite performer doing that. So there's absolutely, no reason. I think, when most people say they've got 30 minutes anyway, they can probably squeeze an extra 10 on there if they adapt and change other things.
Definitely. Yeah. Or alternatively, if you want to do a 40-minute session, but you've only got 30 minutes, you've almost undoubtedly got 10 minutes at some other time of the day. Yes. And this is what I come across all the time. It's like, you don't necessarily, if you've got 40 minutes of training to get done, it doesn't necessarily have to happen at the same time. I mean, obviously there's benefits that go with already being warm, and going back to what you were saying before, it might not be the optimal way you want to train. Like maybe you specifically want to get your muscular conditioning stuff in after your strength stuff when your muscles are already quite fatigued or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you can't do that, you can't do it. But if you can get 30 minutes of hypertrophy done, and then you can do 10 minutes of muscular conditioning later on in the day, that's better than missing one or the other. And you still are sending the same stimulus to the cells of the body. You're still initiating that progressive overload if you're doing it consistently week on, week out. You're still achieving, you're ticking the main boxes. It might not be exactly how you want to do it, but you're still ticking those boxes. And you're getting it done. Okay, it's a bit of a noise to jump into a gym kit just for 10 minutes at another part of the day or whatever. Maybe you have to have another quick shower, but just deal with it.
And also, it's nice to, progressive overload over a period of time is something you always want. That is how gains are made. There is such a thing as, the biological law of accommodation, which is if you keep hitting an organism with the same stimulus, it eventually accommodates it and you stop reacting. But you don't necessarily go backwards, even if you're accommodating. Not all the time. That's only really a symptom of overtraining. So one of the things to make yourself feel better is what I do when I'm trying to get various training sessions in, and I've got the obligation of the baby, and okay, I had to run today this session instead of doing the strength training, is to understand that, okay, I didn't get the perhaps the intensity of a session, perhaps I had to cut it short, but I'm still maintaining. So at least maintaining isn't going backwards. So what's happened is I've just extended the cycle, this period of training. So I've not gone backwards. Okay, I wanted to achieve X by this month. Well, maybe it's going to be in 6 weeks. Maybe it's going to be in an extra couple of months. It's different when you've got a deadline for an event, but you can always treat your event as part of the training as well. This is a lifetime progression in fitness and health. And at the end of the day, what do we really want? Yes, it's nice to have accolades, but really we want to be able to move around, do what we want without being in pain and overdue fatigue as a result of it. And that you're definitely going to achieve if you keep moving and keep going on. So maintenance isn't failure. Failure to train or going backwards is failure. Maintenance isn't failure. So as long as you're doing something towards your goal or something in line with endurance, something in line with strength, something in line with physical activity, then at least you're not going backwards. You are maintaining.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're doing actually is you're limiting the chance of injury. And when it comes to athletic training, really injury is the ultimate failure because it screws you, and then you don't have that consistency. And that's really interesting data to look at as well. As the success of athletes comes down to the consistency. When you look at athletes that have had, So I want to just kind of talk a little bit about specifically how I've been training, because, especially sort of like bodybuilding and stuff like that, that's kind of become fairly widely accepted that you can do that in a fairly short space of time. Like even, Dorian Yates, as another example, kind of what you were saying earlier, was renowned for getting all his workouts done in about sort of 45 minutes or so. And people have become pretty, like I say, pretty widely accepting that short duration training can yield quite good results for stuff like that. But I think the thing that that people tend to allow themselves to believe is not really possible in the light of a busy schedule is the more endurance based stuff. And last year I gave myself about 5 months to train for an Ironman. I'd never done triathlon before. I'd never ridden a road bike before. I was terrible at swimming. And I think another assumption at that point from a lot of people that were sort of following what I was doing then was that I was doing really, really long training sessions. And because, part of my job is related to fitness, that I've got all the time in the world to do that. And that was not the case at all. So for the majority of my training period leading up to that, my sessions were about an hour with one long session per week, and that session would be as long as it needed to be. The longest one I did was 6 hours. That was my longest cycle. And then it was only in the last probably 4 to 6 weeks before I did it that sessions, the rest of my sessions started to get a little bit longer as well, because I was starting to combine the disciplines together. Okay, it does get a little bit more complex with something like a triathlon, because you want to get used to what they call brick sessions. So doing a swim followed immediately by a cycle, or doing a cycle followed immediately by a run, in which case you do obviously have to allow a little bit more time. But honestly, most of the time leading up to that would be up to 1 hour of training for most of the disciplines through the week. I was training about 5 days a week, sometimes 6. But if I'm training 6, one of those days was probably active recovery. So we're looking at 5 or 6 sessions within an hour, either a shorter run or a fairly quick swim. The cycles would usually be the longer ones. Sometimes I'd push them to kind of 90 minutes or so, because especially if you're living in the city, you've got to get out of the city if you don't have a turbo trainer or whatever. And then I'll have one long session, which would usually end up being between sort of 3 to 5 hours. Now, at the moment, I'm training for my first official ultra marathon, which only gave myself about 8 weeks to do. Obviously, a bit less to worry about because it's only running, but my training's been even less for this. I mean, I've been doing about five days a week. I always have 2 days fully off a week, 100%, right? And I would say all of my sessions have been within an hour, apart from one longer session per week, which I upped to 2 over the last few weeks as well. And the reason that I upped it to 2, and this is one of the main things I want to talk about, because so the run that I'm going to be doing in a couple of weeks is a 100-kilometer run. Okay, and my training load has not been consistent enough for long enough that I can do training runs to within kind of 70% or more of the race distance that I'm going to race, right? So I'm not in a condition to go out tomorrow and run 70 kilometers as a training run, before I do this one. And anyway, there's a lot of literature out there that talks about how really long training runs are quite often sort of overrated and even unnecessary for these specific events. So the reason that I've done upped the longer sessions to 2 per week is so that I can do a back-to-back longer training session. So my week will basically look like this: 3 shorter sessions all done within 60 minutes, 1 long session up to the longest one I did was about 4.5 hours, with another one the following day at around half the distance again. With the idea being that longish one, but shorter, that second long one, it is still being done when I'm already fatigued. Okay, because the point is that what's going to become difficult on the day of the event is that you're trying to keep running when you're already really tired.
Yeah,
well,
running on tired legs.
Yeah, exactly. And so even if you're not running all of that distance in one go on one day, if you're running again the next day, you're still running when you're fatigued. You're still running when you're really sore. And actually, that's been one of the hardest things about events that I've done that have been over 2 days, is actually getting up and going again the next day. It's almost even worse than if you just get it done in one go, because you wake up and you're just like, oh, my calves are like blocks of, like house bricks. Now I've got to do it all again. So that's how I've kind of got around that inaccessibility to do really long training sessions, either because of time or because my body simply can't withstand the load when it's delivered all in one go. So I've got just enough of a break, overnight to roll out, stretch off a little bit, eat lots of good food, get some sleep, then come back. I'm still sore, I'm still tired the next day, but then I can just accumulate the mileage over those 2 days instead. So I would say that that's still a relatively feasible for most people. Most people, even busy people, will say that they've got an hour a day to train 4 or 5 days a week. And then I'm only upping the duration of that over 2 days. And so the schedule that I've got for the next couple of weeks before I actually do the event is 3 1-hour sessions, 1 4-hour session, and then a 2-hour session the following day. And those might not necessarily be the exact times, but that's around about where it's going to be. And then 2 full days off, which still gives you, either, most people are doing their longer sessions on the weekend, I fit it in around my own work schedule, and then I take a full weekend off, whatever works for people there. But I would equally say that I could, I've inched out as much time as I've got to play with. But if somebody was to say to me, right, I've got 4 30 to 60 minute sessions a week, and then one day where I could get one long training session in, I would still say it would be doable. I would say that you could program it and still train. If you had at least a 12-week block and you've got a base level of okay fitness, you could train to a pretty high standard for most kind of endurance events like a marathon and above, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think most human beings have the aerobic capacity to complete marathons, to complete ultra marathons. Even people whose sport is the opposite, like 100-meter sprinters, can still run a marathon. They're not going to do it in competitive times, but they can still do it. You've still got the energy in the system to do it. My question is, in terms of, like you say, sort of running on tired legs and things like that, that there are motor patterns in the running gait that can be strengthened, and various joint complexes like the ankles and the feet and things like that, as they fatigue locally. Like, you may have the actual aerobic capacity to complete it quite easily, but as your legs get knackered, and I don't know, your anterior tibialis just doesn't allow you to decelerate as you put your foot down, which can lead to a twisted ankle and stuff like that. Like, those are the things, not even twisting your ankle, but just like the extra pounding that are going to make it uncomfortable and get in your head and that kind of stuff. How do you feel about that? Are you factoring that stuff into your training?
Yeah, definitely. And this is the other thing that I wanted to come on to, so I'm sort of glad that you asked this question specifically. It's like making the most of the opportunity to train each stimulus. So you want to do, obviously you want to be doing a combination, well, not obviously, but you want to be doing a combination, even for long endurance events like that, of strength training for all the reasons that you talked about earlier, endurance, and everything in between. So like your form, your lactate threshold, all of this kind of stuff. So those longer sessions are the only sessions that I really focus on the stuff that you just mentioned. So not just the aerobic capacity, but just basically conditioning everything else. And then in those other sessions, I'll take it easy enough that I can as fully recover from that as possible. So that's the worst thing about it, is doing that second run is everything's just sore around the joints. All your tendons and everything just feels really sore, and you're having to still run on that. And again, really tuning into your body and understanding how you're feeling. So, for example, I had a week, my hardest training week was like my peak week, I guess. I did, maybe it was the week before. No, sorry. So I had one training week where I ran 30 kilometers on one day. Then I ran around 20 the next day, and then I planned to run about another 15 the following day. So I wanted to do 3 days in a row where I was gradually tapering off the distance, but just accumulating it. Sorry, a 10K. I was going to run a 10K on the third day. But on that third day, I was just feeling too sore. I knew that I was going to do more damage than good if I actually ran. But
it's hard telling yourself that.
Yeah, it is because you plan to do it as well, and when you think the way we do, once you've got your plan, you want to execute it. You feel like you failed if you don't follow through.
And you're wondering what your true motivation is. Like, am I bottled?
Yeah, exactly. The question that comes into your mind is, am I being a pussy? Basically. So I think you just cut out for a second there, but yeah, basically the ultimate question that springs into your mind immediately is, am I being a pussy, or should I just get on with it? And I was like, well, let's rationalize this for a second. Really, what I'm aiming to do, my long-term goal is to be able to be on my feet for 100 kilometers. And in reality, the run that I'm doing, it's got 1,700 meters of elevation. So it's not going to be a constant run. There's going to be hiking in there. There's going to be walking. There's going to be bits that just unrunnable, or just too tired to run up. And you have to find that balance between recovery. You can't plan everything in advance because you don't know how you're going to feel in advance. You don't know how your body's going to respond to the stimulus in advance. You've got an idea, but until you've actually done it, and then you're in that recovery phase, you don't find out how you're feeling and how you've responded to it until then. So you have to be adaptable. And the plan was, I did my 30K on Monday. I did the 20, I think it was 21K on the Tuesday. Planned to do the 10K on Wednesday. I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. But what I am going to do is do all my calls for that day walking around my local area, and ended up racking up 15 miles. So I was still on my feet for 15 miles, but what that did was provided a stimulus where my body is still becoming conditioned to being on my feet for that amount of time, but giving myself the opportunity to actually recover from the training that I've already done as well. And this is what I mean by this kind of out of the box thinking. I also got work done during that time. It was training time that I had set aside that I was then able to do other stuff in as well.
I'm actually impressed. That was smart. That was really smart.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean,
yeah, I know.
Well, because I was also kind of proud of myself for it, because like a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have done that. A couple of years ago, I probably would have just forced myself through it, or I would have done as much as I could to the point where I was pretty much broken, and then I would have taken my recovery. And I was almost at that point. Last week, I did my longest training run, which was 45K. And I chose an amazing route where I ended up in the middle of nowhere, which is my perfect, place to run, just out in the countryside, nothing around. But I didn't realize how isolated it was going to be. And I had money to replenish my water supply while I was out there. It was one of the hottest days that it's been. And at the point where I was expecting to kind of pass through a town and be able to do that, there was no shops, there was nothing around me, and I ended up completely running dry. And I was running back to a train station ultimately, and on the way to the one that I was ultimately heading for, I went past the one on the same line. So at this point, I could have got on this train to come back, and I was completely out of water. And to be honest, I was quite fucked, for lack of a better phrase. I was pretty dead, and I had to then reassess that situation. Am I going to do more damage here by just completely dehydrating myself just to get this distance done? But at that point, I decided I was just going to go for it. I knew that I was going to be I knew that mentally it was going to beat me up if I didn't get the distance in, because it was my last opportunity to get it. I had that distance in my mind. I knew that I could do it and that it would just be uncomfortable. And then the even worse thing about it was that when I finally got to the next train station, so I still had 10K to go basically, when I realized that I was completely out of water and that I was at a train station I could get the train home on, or I could get to the next one. I still had 10K to meet the distance. And I made it to the next train station, even more fucked, with like 2K left to go, and ended up just running up and down the high street to make up the time, to make up the distance. Sorry. Just because I knew mentally I had to get that 45K in the bag. But again, I still think I was quite rational about that decision. I think at this point now, I've learned that it just doesn't make sense to beast yourself to the point of, to breaking point. And I've had to shed off a little bit of the military mindset to some extent to kind of achieve that. Yeah. So when you said that was smart, and I said I know, what I really meant was I actually remember thinking I'm actually quite pleased with myself for doing that. That's not something that I'm growing. Yeah. I feel like I'm maturing into a more versatile human. But little things like that. So we've been a bit all over the place with this one, but there's been some good points covered. Was there anything that you were hoping to add in to the mix?
No, I just have one question. It's slightly not in line. But how were you measuring the distance out of interest? Like, how did you know there was 2K to go?
On my GPS watch, on my sport watch. Yeah. I mean, two means actually I'd already planned the route out using the 𝐃𝐚𝐫𝐞 app. So I was actually using my phone to navigate, using 𝐃𝐚𝐫𝐞, and so I knew that as long as I was taking the route that I planned and I was going to end up at my end, my designated end point, that I would get the distance in, but just I was also recording it on my watch. And actually, I always go off the watch to make sure I'm getting the actual distance. If the phone says, "Oh, you're at your end point," but there's like 1 mile left to go, or 1K left to go, whenever I usually end up running it. I've done that loads. I'm this weird guy that people always see running around the block where I live because I'm just trying to make up the distance.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But I want to just touch again on actually something that you brought up earlier that's really, really important. you're talking about like strength, the importance of strength work, and the importance of strength work for endurance stuff, and how, if your 1 rep max is greater, then you're going to be able to do more repetitions with a lesser load, and that's essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about endurance. And that's a great point, because one of the really limiting factors during an endurance event is your form, how long you can maintain good form for. And this is the reason, the 2 main reasons why endurance athletes make sure they do strength work. One is that injury prevention, which we also already touched on, but the other one is maintaining good form, because as soon as your form starts to go, your running efficiency decreases,
It
and
does.
then your economy, it suffers. So
100%. And then to add to that, just there's a difference between chronic injury and acute injury. Acute injury is, I fell down a hole and I broke my leg or twisted my ankle or whatever. Chronic injury is something that happens slowly over time. And I'm a big believer in the statement that all chronic injury is a result of unskillful movement, poor movement patterns. 30 million years of evolution from ape-like primate to modern human doesn't leave much room for error. You're not built wrong. Knees don't just wear out. Backs don't just wear out. Hips don't just wear out as you get older. They will last you for life. They will last you. Even if you live 120 years, they will last you. If you're 120 years old and you're an active marathon runner, they will last you. Everything will last you as long as your technique is appropriate. So that on that note, I couldn't overemphasize having the ability to maintain form throughout your event enough, especially if it's something you do repeatedly, because not only will it knock you out on the day, but it will knock you out quite literally forever. So that is a big one. And if being strong in certain areas is important to maintaining that form, then that's something that needs to be worked on. A classic example is, I think every runner should skip rope. Puts the elasticity in your calves, it strengthens your Achilles tendon, it gets you used to the appropriate type of rebounding impact. It's absolutely brilliant, and it improves your form. It gets you using the natural forces of elasticity and momentum over muscle action.
Man, I need to squeeze that in somewhere. I've been meaning to include that for so long, and I know you're a massive advocate of it, and you always talk it. And the benefits are obvious, like even when you just think about it from a mechanical point of view, essentially, especially if you are also advocating pose running, like I know that you're very big on that, and I've tried to steer my running technique towards pose method as much as possible. It just makes perfect sense when people get taught to pose run. They quite often use skipping drills as a main basis of that stuff, don't they? So, yeah, definitely, especially because one of my ankles is a bit rubbish. Need to include those drills in there. Yeah, mate, I think we covered most of the bases. So hopefully people that are sort of really busy and looking to include some training have got a slightly better idea how to do it. I think this is probably quite a broad topic to try and cover within an hour. Maybe we can specify a bit more. I'd like to maybe get somebody on. I'm digging around my contacts list for people that have had a bit of experience specifically coaching endurance stuff. Maybe triathlon, because I know that they're very popular sports for within the kind of professional for professionals. For some reason they tend to steer towards those. I'm not really sure why that is, actually. That could be interesting to explore. So if you think of somebody, let's see if we can get them
We've
on.
got a couple of people in mind.
Yeah, awesome, good stuff, man. Okay, great. So guys, if you're looking to take the leap to peak performance from wherever you are, looking to optimize all aspects of health and wellness for optimum human performance, then don't hesitate to book in a call. Okay, no need to mess around. Just use the link in the description here to book in a call with us so we can talk about your goals, talk about how we can work together. And more importantly than anything, have an awesome day. Feel free to leave any comments, questions on anything that you've seen here in the comment section now, and then we can look at getting around to answering those in any future talks. All right. Well, that's from me. It's Gaz. Thanks very much.
No worries. Yeah, get into it, folks.
Yes, get into it indeed. All right. See you later.
See ya.